It's going to be one of these afternoons. Please.
Through the chair.
Hang on. Take the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, I just wondered if you wouldn't mind taking a vote on a yes vote or a no vote from the audience today.
No, we're not doing that. Any reasonable questions from the audience? Yes. Right, wait a minute. Let's get the mic. Is this young fit chap here running towards you?
I think it was Steve earlier that you mentioned that there's no headquarters of insurance companies in Scotland. They're all based in England. So my question's actually for John. If there are going to be, if the insurance companies that are in Scotland at the moment take their business back down to the UK and base their headquarters through there, what do you propose happens for the insurance industry in Scotland after that?
I didn't hear Steve's contribution, but I was surprised that he said there were no headquarters of insurance companies.
I didn't say it. Somebody said it wasn't me.
Oh, right, okay. There's a number of insurance company headquarters in Scotland, not least of which is, I was talking to a gentleman from Standard Life earlier on who'll be surprised to hear if his headquarters is not in Edinburgh. Let me just go through one of the things which I think has happened that's regrettable. I used to work for an insurance company that was headquartered in Scotland. I worked for Scottish Amicable for 5 years before, that's when I properly used to work for a living before I became a member of Parliament. And it was headquartered in Scotland. We did all of our head office when I first went there was in Glasgow. We did all of our legal work with legal firms in St Vincent Street in Glasgow. We did our actuarial work with actuarial firms in Glasgow. We did our marketing work with marketing firms in Glasgow, and it had a profound effect on the Glasgow economy and the Scottish economy. In 1987, the company got taken over by the Prudential, and the headquarters essentially left Scotland, and there's still a lot of people employed under the Prudential umbrella in Scotland, and very welcome participants. But a lot of the very high value work that would spill out of a headquarters organisation no longer takes place in Scotland. That takes place in and around the Prudential's headquarters, which I think, if my memory serves right, is in Reading. Now, I think that's a point of regret. It's not just that. It's not just only that's happened to Scottish Amicable. There's been a whole host of other life insurance companies in Scotland where control has been lost from the Scottish economy to elsewhere, and economic activity has been lost as a consequence. Part of that, I think, is to do with what is often called the gravitational pull of London, that there is a sense that everything's got to happen in and around London for it to be substantive economic activity. And what I want to do, and this is, I think, one of the great opportunities of independence, is to create a more vibrant Scottish economy that makes it more attractive for us to build up headquarters here in Scotland, because we've got a whole range of different headquarters of major companies in Scotland in a variety of different sectors. But I want to see that more broadly spread. I want to see that having more of an economic impact in Scotland, so that we can build up the employment levels and the levels of economic activity that arise as a consequence. As regards the transition to becoming an independent country, I've been involved in the constitutional debate for over 30 years now, and I vividly remember some of the stories that were told before the devolution referendum about the companies that would shut up shop and leave Scotland as a consequence of devolution, and it never happened. And I think we've just got to be a bit kind of resilient about these arguments and realise that if we, as an independent country, have the obligation to generate the wealth and the resources to pay for our public services and to create all the different parts of our society that we want to have, then we have to create an environment which is business friendly, that's good for the economy, it's good for employment, and that to me would drive the decisions of an independent Scottish Government to create a more vibrant economy that met the needs of people in our country.
Thank you for that, John. All other three speakers want to come in on that question, so we'll just go along the table. Murdo.
Thanks. I think it was me who made the comment you were talking about. I think what I said was there were no general insurers with a headquarters in Scotland. I'm sorry if that's not true, and if it's not true, I'll take it out with my researcher. on Monday morning. But there are, I mean, John's quite right, there are a large number of life and pension companies in Scotland. There are still banks, RBS notably headquartered in Scotland. I think the issue for them is 90% of their customer base in the event of independence would be in the rest of the UK, which would then be in a foreign country. Would it suit their business model then to have a situation where their head office was in Edinburgh or Glasgow, or wherever it might be, 90% of their customer base elsewhere? Would they be tempted to move their business to where most of their customers were? I think there's a real risk of that, and I think that's something we need to be very conscious of.
Yeah. Steve? Now, can we use this microphone for...
I'll speak loudly.
Yeah.
It is a very good question. In fact, it's such a good question. There's a researcher headed south as we speak. We live in a global market. Capital flows across borders on a regular basis. Firms up sticks and move. I work in the City of London. The City of London is full of new buildings. Aon, the biggest broker in the world, have recently relocated their entire worldwide headquarters to London. You may have seen stories in the news over the summer, the walkie-talkie building, the one that at 2 o'clock in the afternoon the sun bounces off the glass, it fries eggs on the pavement. That building is going to be opening shortly, and it's absolutely full of insurers. So it is a very, very good question. How these issues around taxation, regulation, currency and capital, how those questions get answered will depend on how attractive or otherwise Scotland is as a place for firms to invest their capital.
Thank you. Yeah, just a very quick comment. I think it's my job partly to, in many ways, to tell as many people as possible just why Scotland is the best place in the world to do financial services business. And at the moment, part of my story is, of course, we're in the same jurisdiction as the largest financial centre in the world, and so on. Now, obviously, if Scotland became an independent country, that would no longer be the case. But it follows that it is perfectly possible at the moment to have a world-beating insurance company like Standard Life headquartered in Scotland, and yet at the same time to be within that jurisdiction. That would just have to change. That's not a kind of optional thing or something we could manage away. That would be a significant part of Scotland becoming a country different from and separate from the rest of the UK. So I think there are probably arguments on both sides. I certainly agree with what John says about focusing on the Scottish economy and its needs and so on. I think, for all sorts of historical reasons, the industry that I represent has grown up as a wholly international business. So while of course it's a big part of what we're here for, to serve the Scottish economy and see it prosper, a lot of our concern is about other markets, and notably, as has already been mentioned, the market where 90% in many cases of our customers are, and that's the rest of the UK. So, I think we see ourselves very much as an international industry, and I suppose one of the big questions around independence is would that necessitate some reconfiguration to ensure that we could still serve the same markets that we currently serve? Just a quick question really that I wanted to ask, really for a point of clarification of John, if I may, and again I apologise, I'm sorry this was something I said in my presentation which you weren't here for, but simply as a matter of process, without expressing any view at all on the merits or otherwise of a currency union or any of the other currency options, in trying to sort of map my way through the process, it seems as if we would have a vote in the referendum. If it was a yes vote, it would sort of fire the starting gun on a process of clarifying all these things. And one of the big things to be clarified would be the currency. So we'd be in a situation for some period of time, we can't say how long, where we would know a currency change some currency change would have to come, whether that was a currency union on some different basis or whether it was a separate currency, we wouldn't know. And during that period, it feels to me at the moment almost there's an inescapable period of time where we would have a period of not just theoretical uncertainty about the currency options we've been discussing, but kind of real live uncertainty. And I just wondered if you thought that was an inevitable part of the process as you see it unfolding.
But I think the short answer to Owen about the process is that we have a referendum in September 2014, and we then would be, if it was a yes vote, we would have to go through a process of negotiation with the rest of the United Kingdom to agree the basis and the terms of the independence settlement based on the white paper that we would have put to the public in September 2014 and its contents, and of course the currency point that I've made would be part of those that proposition. Now, in terms of how long I would expect that period to go on for, I think that period would last. We've said that we think that period would last from September 2014 to the elections to the first independent parliament in the spring of 2016, a period of about 18 months. And the United Kingdom government's constitutional advisor has said that he thinks that's a reasonable and realistic timescale. Now, within that, clearly there are questions which have an effect on both Scotland and the rest of the UK. So I come back to the point I just made a moment ago, that I think it's in the interest of everybody to resolve these questions speedily and effectively. And what you hear about in the kind of tone and rhetoric of the UK government before the referendum, I think in the event of a yes vote would change quite dramatically, because they would have issues which would have to be resolved in the aftermath of a referendum. So there would be an appetite on both sides of the debate to resolve those issues as quickly and as collaboratively as possible. And I cite as my encouragement for that view the fact that we have now arrived at, with the UK government, an agreement around the process of handling the referendum, which is now completely and utterly 100% agreed between the UK government and the Scottish government. Now, if you go back, 18 months, the UK government was saying that the referendum, bluntly over their dead body, that it was, not going to happen, they weren't going to lift a finger to help us, blah, blah, blah. And we're now in a position where we have a completely agreed process, which I think is great, because whatever the outcome of the referendum, everyone will know where they stand, because that referendum is totally beyond reproach. And I simply cite that, to highlight the fact that pre-discussion it was going to be terribly difficult, and there wasn't going to be agreement, and it would be perpetual fighting about it in the courts. And then we reached agreement, and it was fine. And that's all just gone away completely as an argument.
Thank you. Another question? One here in the middle.
Thanks very much. In many ways, I'm listening to the debate, and the word confidence comes into mind, and it's all to do with confidence. It's all to do with the negative debate trying to inject a kind of almost like the consistency of there are so many unanswered questions, and therefore confidence is not helped by all those unanswered questions. Always coming forward with the imagination to give any positive, imaginative ways forward, and that's partly what I'm hearing. If I be specific in the question that I'm about to ask, is that there was a discussion there about companies having the confidence to stay in Scotland or move away from Scotland, and the wider economic ideas is to do with fiscal policy and many other things, but particularly fiscal policy. If I get selfish in the question, many people around here are running SMEs, and we're subject to corporation tax. And the corporation tax, I'm the offensive about business, I'm always thinking, how the hell am I going to keep the corporation tax bill down? How am I going to pay it once it's assessed? And we have no real opportunity to influence the rate of corporation tax, because it's set by the UK government. And so, selfishly, my question is probably to John about what plans we can have for local decisions can be made about local matters, particularly to do with corporation tax. Then, less selfishly, in a wider sense, that the point I'm trying to make about fiscal activity in corporation tax is that larger companies, which are not SMEs, in terms of staying in Scotland, will have an incentive where we have a local opportunity to decide on those type of matters, particularly fiscal matters, which is not unrelated to monetary union as well. So what's the plans for SMEs in terms of that setup, and what are the bigger plans for the wider larger companies to keep them in Scotland? So by the way, in terms of financial centres, Edinburgh was always built as one of the largest financial centres outside of London. Always will be, always has been, and has a large centre because people like to stay living in Edinburgh and in central Scotland because it's that much facilitating and quality of life.
Okay, thanks. John, are you going to take that one?
Certainly, yes, sir. I think the first thing I'd say is that one of the things we've, as a government, been determined to do in the current context is to use our what flexibility we have over business taxation to create maximum advantage for Scottish companies, and particularly for SMEs. So, since 2008, we have reduced, and since 2009 for certain companies eliminated the payment of business rates, which is the only business tax that we have, over which we have control in Scottish Government. We decided to do it deliberately to try to support very directly the SME sector in Scotland. There's now about 89,000 SMEs in Scotland that either pay no or reduced business rates. So as an indication of our direction of travel, I think you can see where our thinking is on that question. And in addition to that, we have now the most competitive and advantageous business rates regime in the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's what we've done with our existing powers. I think that's important because then you've got to encourage and incentivise the business community, and we have a commitment, and obviously we can't do anything about corporation tax just now. Our view is that we'd be in an advantageous position if we had a more competitive rate of corporation tax in Scotland. So the proposal we've advanced is for a reduction of corporation tax of 3% against the UK rate, and that would create ever more competitive conditions. It would also, in my view, help to ensure that Scotland was an ever more attractive place in which to do business. So I think the tools at our disposal become much broader. It's not just about corporation tax. One of the points you mentioned was about access to the Scottish market. One of the problems that we've got is that for travel in and out of Scotland, the existence of air passenger duty is a kind of double whammy for people getting to Scotland. You pay air passenger duty to get to the UK, and then on any flights, unless you fly directly into Scotland, you pay again to come from other UK airports into Scotland. And it's a very material consideration, and that's not just me saying that. You've got all the airports of Scotland who are absolutely on their high horse about air passenger duty. Again, we could operate a more sympathetic regime than the one that exists just now. Got other issues like the way in which you can use the tax credit system to encourage company expansion, and there are ways in which you can design tax incentives that will encourage companies to invest and to grow. And again, that's part of the kind of range of levers that would become available for independent Scotland if we had that range of powers.
Okay, thank you. Murdo?
Thanks. To go back to the question on corporation tax, I think it's worth remembering that in the UK we have one of the lowest corporation tax rates at the moment in Europe, and it has come down again under the current coalition government. To be fair to the previous Labour government, which I'm not often prone to do, but to be fair to Gordon Brown, he also brought it down. So we already have a relatively low corporation tax rate internationally, and it's reducing. And we do vote for the UK government. We have votes for UK elections. It's not like we are entirely in Scotland without a voice there. We're part of the UK. I thought what was interesting about John's response there. I know the SNP have set forward this agenda about we could reduce corporation tax. If people from the Yes campaign are talking to a business audience, they'll focus very much on this, enterprising Scotland, low tax Scotland, helping business thrive. But there's another audience, a more left-wing audience, that you'll hear people talking about things like a more Scandinavian-style state, where you actually have higher taxes. People pay more in, so you can support greater public services. And of course, you can't have both of these things at the same time. You've got to make a choice. And independent Scotland, presumably in the first election to an independent Scotland, which would be in the spring of 2016, people in Scotland would make that choice. I assume different parties would stand with different platforms. And we'd have to choose one or other of these options, or possibly something in between. So just because the SNP are saying now they would cut corporation tax, it doesn't necessarily mean that's an automatic consequence of voting for independence, because we don't know what would happen thereafter. I just want to say something more broadly. You mentioned about financial services in Edinburgh. A real life example of what can go wrong, just look at Canada. If you look at Canada 40 years ago, the financial sector in Canada was largely based in Montreal. If you look at Canada today, the financial sector is largely based in Toronto. And businesses have moved from Montreal to Toronto for a number of reasons, but the major factor in that was the constitutional issue. The Bank of Montreal today has its headquarters not in Montreal, but in Toronto. I think that tells its own story.
Okay. Owen, could... Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. I suppose the only point I was going to make was just, I mean, your question about, you know, differences that could come about through decisions taken in the future independent Scotland on tax. And as I think Murdo has already pointed out, it's not really given to us to know now what those decisions would be for reasons he's explained. What I do think it does continue to highlight, though, is that you would see difference you would have a different tax system. I mean, that's, you know, it's just not possible to conceive that a country newly independent, or in any actual country, would not have a tax system of its own to suit its own needs. Again, I come back to my point about the single UK financial services market that we currently have. Different products would be needed for different markets.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the floor? Yes.
I think that it's excellent that we're speaking about insurance because all too often we tend to talk in terms of financial services, and insurance has tended to be a bit of a poor relation, I think, when considered alongside the banks in particular. And I think generally in economies, I always think that if banking is the engine, then insurance is the brakes, the airbags and the seatbelts. And it never gets the prominence and the attention that it deserves. I'm really interested, almost regardless of what the decision is at the referendum, what thoughts do the panel have as to how Scotland can become an even better place for insurance businesses to do business?
Okay. Owen, do you want to take that one?
Shall I? Sorry, huh? Thanks very much. It is absolutely true that Scotland has a very, very strong position in the marketplace as a place to do the business of insurance. You see the success of our insurance industry. It really is quite outstanding, and the UK, as was said earlier, is one of the largest insurance industries in the world, and between a fifth and a quarter of all the employees working in that very important industry are in Scotland. So I can see in this debate everything can be interpreted as implying an opinion, and genuinely what I'm about to say is not implying an opinion. I'm simply stating the fact that the UK government has recently really upped its game for our industry, for the financial services industry as a whole, in the way that we are promoted internationally. And the first two priority sectors they've identified for that, both of them are unique, are very, very strong suits for Scotland. The first is fund management. I've been involved in discussions about how to get better at promoting the UK as a centre for asset management. We're one of the biggest, easily the biggest in Europe, but we know we can get a lot bigger still. And so there's a really good and focused group of people working on that, and insurance is the second in that list. Now, this is early days. Deloitte have been asked to do some work on, how to go about it. They're scoping out the work and all the rest of it. I imply no view by simply observing that there is an opportunity there for Scotland to participate in that larger effort that is currently being pursued through the UK authorities. Now, that is straightforward international promotion. It's about selling our skills and our abilities in international markets. So there are opportunities that are coming through the fact that we're within the same jurisdiction as the UK. Of course, if one wants to sort of hypothesise about whether Scotland could do that better as an independent country, clearly there are very successful countries with very successful financial services industries. Luxembourg come to mind, a very small country indeed, a lot smaller than Scotland, and yet they thrive in the business of international promotion. But as matters currently stand, I think there is an increasing recognition that insurance is a major UK strength that we should be, for the UK, that we should be promoting more internationally.
Okay. Anyone else want to? Can I? Please. Yep.
Ian, thanks for the question. You say what can make Scotland a better place? Scotland is already a very good place for the insurance industry. What can make it better? Well, let me answer that from an insurance broking perspective. It's the same answer I would give to an audience whether they be in Cornwall or whether they be in Aberdeen. This is about us collectively raising our game. Insurance brokers play a significant role in the provision and distribution of general insurance. We make a 1% contribution to UK GDP. That's the same as the agriculture sector, yet we're not perceived to be so important. And what makes insurance brokers so special? We give advice, we offer choice, we give our expertise. We need to make that point loud and clear to the politicians, to the civil servants, to the regulators, to the press, to the opinion informers, and to our customers, most importantly. And professionalism. There is a debate already kicking off in our sector about raising standards. I would really ask you all to engage in that debate. It's far better for us as a sector, as a profession, to set our standards than rely on the regulator to do it for us. So please, when that debate kicks off, engage in it. If we can do all of those things, then Scotland will be an even better place to do insurance business.
Okay, thank you. Murdo?
Thanks. I think in many ways the answer to your question is not specific to general insurance. It is about business more generally in Scotland. I think what we need to do is make sure we're keeping a low cost base by not putting additional costs on business. I think we need very good quality infrastructure so people can move around, and also better connectivity in terms of broadband and all that involves. And we need high quality skills, so you're getting the people into the business with the skills you need, and that's all about partnerships with local colleges and universities, and that's where I think government can best direct its operations. I also think that, like all industries, it's about reputation and about leadership, and having people in government prepared to make the case and speak up for you. And because I was kind to the Labour Party earlier, I'll be kind to John's party now, because I think the Scottish Government actually do a good job in helping promote Scottish industry generally and Scottish business generally. I was always a sceptic about devolution. I'm now a convert to devolution because I can see there are advantages in having a devolved government in Scotland with a focus on some of these key sectors that otherwise wasn't there. We see that in Scotland, we see that in London, where you've got Boris Johnson taking a focus on the city and raising that agenda. It can be done here too. So these are some of the things I think that would help.
I'm not always encouraged by Murdo Fraser's contributions, but I've just been encouraged by his last one. Kind of, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think he's perhaps on a journey to accepting.
That's too long a journey for me, John.
I'm maybe interpreting you just a tad too far, Murdo, but Murdo makes a very sort of, I make a similar point to the one that Murdo's made, which is I think, actually, when you see the fruits of government operating in Scotland, focus on Scottish priorities, you see the returns of that. And what we decided to do in 2007, when we were fortunate enough to be elected as the government, was we formed an economic strategy which was concentrated on 7 key sectors of the economy, one of which was financial services. We have an infrastructure where the Financial Services Advisory Board meets the First Minister a couple of times a year. And it's representative of the whole selection of the industry, from asset management to general insurance to life insurance to pensions to the banking sector. And I think Ian's got a fair point that in amongst the debate for the last 5 years, the banking debate is kind of almost overwhelmed the debate about financial services. But there's tremendous strength in Scotland. The asset management sector is a huge success story of some of the development of major employers in Scotland that have literally started off with next to no employees 10 years ago, and now very substantial employers within the Scottish economy. And that can be done, I think, by government leading from the front, and Murdo very kindly indicated that we do that. We do it all the time. I lead from the front on financial services as part of my responsibilities, but we also line up the skills environment. So we line up the colleges and the universities are part of the Financial Services Advisory Board, so that we can say to universities, by the way, you're not producing enough people with the right skills to service the industry, so you better change your provision. And that conversation has gone on in the past. I think we're in a much better place for that now. And we have to line up the whole selection of things. So it's about promotion, it's about skills development, it's about ensuring that we've got all the right infrastructure in place to assist the development of companies. And I certainly take a very open approach with the industry to make sure that we know exactly what the aspirations of the industry are and how we can support and assist them. On the point about international promotion, I think one of the things that struck me, I do a fair amount of international promotion of Scotland on the government's behalf, and what has struck me is that many of the reasons why you can make a greater presence in a particular international market is invariably based on people's perceptions of your country as a whole. And Scotland is lucky enough to be perceived, by and large, around the world, as a place of quality products, of authentic products and authentic skills, and very reliable products. And those characteristics are as valid about the insurance sector as they are about the whisky industry, which performs magnificently across the globe as an export industry and as a success story. But many of the characteristics of how you promote and reinforce the opportunities for those sectors are built on the same characteristics of integrity, reliability and quality in what we do, and I feel we have that in abundance, but we have to continually refresh that, and that's a contribution that companies can make, but government's got a big role to play into that process of development.
Thank you. I don't see a sea of hands, but there must be at least one more question, or two. We'll have one in the middle and then come to you.
Another one there.
In the middle, right?
Just extending Ian's question a little bit further, probably to consumers themselves. There was a column in one of the national newspapers a couple of weeks ago in the financial section where the journalist was reviewing his investments, and he was invested in an insurance fund in Scotland, and he had suggested that he had cancelled that fund and moved the money to an English-based insurer because he didn't want the risk of his money being in Scotland. So what concerns me is obviously that's only an isolated incident and probably didn't register with most people. But as we get closer to the vote, there is a risk that more and more stories of that ilk get out. What has the industry as a whole and the Scottish Government got in hands to more or less publicise the quality of Scotland in the run-up to the vote, to ensure that more and more customers don't move business away from Scottish-based institutions during that period?
Okay, thank you. Owen, I think, is going to deal with that one to begin with.
Thanks very much, and that is in many ways the most difficult question. It is true that there have been a number of inquiries of a similar kind, not only from individuals on the retail side, but also institutional investors. It's not surprising if you're having something like a referendum, and as was said earlier, this is a really big question, internationally significant. I think it's fair to say that so far it's been a trickle rather than a flood of those kinds of questions. I think we probably need to sort of, in a sense, face facts though. As I explained earlier, there is just some inbuilt, for reasons I think we can all understand, it's not given to us to know before the referendum answers to the kind of questions that individual or that journalist and others will be asking. One can choose what to think will unfold on the currency, but unfortunately that's not something one can answer. It's not a question one can answer with absolute certainty before the referendum has taken place and that decision has been taken. So, in answer to your question, what can one do? I can only sort of reflect what I hear others saying, in a sense. For some, it's as blunt as, well, the polls at the moment suggest it's not going to happen, so it's not something you really need to be too troubled about. I mentioned earlier a conversation with the FCA about the conduct implications of the referendum. I think the FCA are keeping a watching brief on these issues. An organisation like SFE is clearly, what we want is for all of our customers to have no concerns about these things, but equally we live, obviously, as I'm very proud to do so, to operate in a democracy where these kind of issues sometimes do create some uncertainties. I hope and believe actually that we will go through the process without seeing serious customer reaction ahead of the referendum. I would say though that if there is a yes vote, then as I tried to say, as I think I said earlier, that would be a moment of crystallisation for many of these theoretical uncertainties that we've been talking about so far. But you raise an issue that a lot of people are, I think, having to think about.
Just to add to what Owen has said, the issue here is the institutional investors, not the individuals moving small amounts. These are the institutional investors. They look at levels of certainty, uncertainty, clearly risk mitigation. If they sense uncertainty and they sense risk, then capital flows. That's what happens in a free market.
I think this is an important question to consider because we're quite self-informed on this. In 2011, the Chancellor of the Exchequer said that inward investment in Scotland would hemorrhage because of the debate on independence. And earlier on this year, Ernst & Young undertake an assessment of inward investment into Scotland on an annual basis. They've done it for many years. And they assessed inward investment into Scotland as being at a 15-year high. So I just think we've got to be really careful about how we use our language on this, and I include in that members of the United Kingdom government, because they're not contributing to this debate in a dispassionate way. They're players in the debate. And that type of language from the Chancellor of the Exchequer that predicted the inevitable hemorrhage of investment into Scotland has been proven to be complete rubbish. So therefore I think we've got to be really careful we don't stoke up arguments which I think are unnecessary arguments to have. We've got a democratic choice to make here as a country. We're entitled to make it, and we should make it in a fashion that enables people to take a sensible, considered decision without, frankly, officials of the representatives of the United Kingdom government making it up, which is what the Chancellor has been caught doing on this issue.
Okay.
Well, I suspect what's happened is people have looked at the opinion polling and concluded that it's not the likeliest of prospects, and they factor that into their decision making.
Yep. Question here.
A point for Murdo. You mentioned earlier on, I think, that Scotland benefit from something like £1,200 per person better than the rest of the UK, which implies to me that Scotland's a bit of a drain. So if that's the case, why are the UK government so keen to keep Scotland as part of the Union?
Well, I think the detailed figures I quoted showed that if you analyse everything that's published about Scotland's contribution to the UK, it fluctuates over time. In the current year, Scotland is in a relatively better position than the UK as a whole, although still running a current account deficit of 7 billion. Of course, the UK as a whole runs a substantial current account deficit, but on the figures John Swinney himself has produced by 2016-17, which is the year we've become independent, we've been in a relative worse position. Look, the United Kingdom is a partnership of nations. You know, it's a bit like a marriage. Sometimes you're better off and sometimes you're worse off. I think there are strengths to being in the United Kingdom, being in that partnership, that outweigh a purely financial calculation. I think we've done great things together as a coming together of four nations over the last 300 years. The contribution we've made to the world, the strength of our economy is much better than it would otherwise have been. And that's a far more important factor than simply looking at a balance sheet.
Okay. John?
Well, just, I don't get very far away from balance sheets on a fairly regular basis, but you know, I think it's an important point we've got to look at here. For many years, Scotland, well, we'll take Murdo's point about you've got to look at this over a longer period in time. Over a longer period in time, Scotland has been consistently in a stronger financial position than the rest of the United Kingdom. And I simply say, well, if and what's a good thing about the debate actually, and I'm a wee bit surprised to hear that Murdo was, I didn't hear him, so I'm better not again trying to put words in his mouth. I'm a bit surprised to hear this £1,200 line being used in his contribution, because what the debate's been good about in the last few months is I think we've reached a point where we've got past the silly argument that somehow Scotland couldn't manage to survive as an independent country. I think it's now very broadly accepted that Scotland is a strong country economically and fiscally and could survive as an independent country. I think we'll then have a more interesting debate once we get rid of all that kind of stuff about, well, what are the possibilities and the opportunities about making our country more successful and able to deliver greater opportunities for our people, and I think that's what this debate should be about.
Thank you. Owen, do you want to word on that?
I don't. I'm happy.
No.
Thanks.
Okay. I'm conscious it's 3:30 and Murdo has to leave us now. Do we have one last question, perhaps? One at the very back.
Afternoon. The debate today has rightly concentrated on the matter of insurance, as was the subject of the forum. Could I ask John and Murdo in particular that win or lose the vote on independence, would it be possible to bring onto the table the loss which Scotland suffered 4 years ago of that competitive institution, namely the Bank of Scotland? It strikes me as daft at best and terrible at worst that that institution is lost to Scotland, and the competition that stems from it and the lack of competition that's in the market today is noticeable. Could I ask what would be their opinion?
Well, I think it's a very significant issue because let me come at it first of all from the issue about competition. I firmly believe we need to have more competition within the banking sector within Scotland, and where we have seen examples of a variety of banks being able to make propositions in local marketplaces, we've seen a general improvement in the competitive offering of lending facilities within the individual markets. It doesn't happen throughout the country. I can point you to particular parts of the country where there's a very competitive banking sector operating, but it's not the whole of the country, and we're trying to encourage much greater diversity and participation within the market. There's obviously changes going to emerge as a consequence of the divestment by Lloyds of the Trustee Savings Bank, and that bank's now been relaunched into the marketplace. I think the point on the Bank of Scotland is a very significant point. I think it's Lloyds actually are going to return. I think the process has probably started now to the more prominent utilisation of the Bank of Scotland brand. The Halifax branding, I think, is going to disappear entirely from Scotland, and the Bank of Scotland will be promoted as a distinctive entity. I think the key point that lies at the heart of your question is, where does decision-making power lie? Because what the Bank of Scotland was able to do before its eye was taken off the ball was be a real partner in investment within Scotland, in the way other long-term institutions that have kept their eye on the ball have been able to do. But it's absolutely crucial for the successful development of our economy that we have banks that are prepared to be long-term partners in delivering economic success within Scotland, and I certainly think it would be enhanced if we had a revitalised and rejuvenated Bank of Scotland active within the market.
I agree with a lot of what John's just said. Actually, I think I remember I was a youngster having I remember having a bank account with it was supposed to be in the Inverness Savings Bank, and I got swallowed up into the Trustee Savings Bank and became TSB. Actually, it gladdens my heart to see the TSB back on the high street, and improving competition in the banking sector. I think there's quite a lot of work going on at BIS in the UK government at the moment, looking at the structure of banking, and I think there's a general understanding that we allowed the banks to get too big, and there wasn't enough competition. And look at the relationship between retail banking and corporate banking. So You know, I'm not here to propose any easy solution to what you're saying, but I think, you know, the direction of travel we're seeing is an encouraging one in terms of promoting much more locally based institutions which will be more responsive to local needs.
Okay, thanks. Owen? Do you want to talk on this?
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief. You said in your question, regardless of the outcome, I actually think this kind of policy question will be heavily influenced by a yes vote or a no vote. So I'm not going to sort of get into kind of hypothesising about those two outcomes, but I think the regulatory frameworks and other kinds of frameworks that would be key to this kind of policy area would necessarily, as I say, as we've discussed at some length today, necessarily would change. So specifically on Bank of Scotland, I think there's so much regret with so many people over what happens. I suppose I do look, though, towards the creation and headquartering in Scotland, not only of Tesco Bank, Sainsbury's Bank. They're different kinds of banks, obviously. They're parts of larger groups. But also, I think we'll see over the next 6 to 9 months another bank being created here in Scotland. So it's not the complete answer. We can all regret what happened at the Bank of Scotland, but there is some rejuvenation in the market going on, and long may that continue.
On behalf of all the insurance brokers in the room, and I'm sure all the insurance brokers across Scotland, could I implore the politicians that when encouraging the banks, you don't let them off the hook when it comes to mis-selling insurance products, because the cost of bank mis-selling insurance products is one that we all bear.
Okay. Thank you for that. Unless I see a flurry of hands, I think I'm going to draw proceedings to close. And before asking, is it Ian Ferguson's going to propose a vote of thanks? But let me just enter my own thanks to you all for coming and for your various contributions. I hope you feel it's been a useful afternoon. It's certainly been an interesting one and challenging one. And let me just thank on your behalf, and on my own behalf, of course, the 4 speakers. Now, Ian Ferguson, I think, is going to do that job properly. Yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. And just on behalf of all of us in the audience, I think it was fascinating, but it was also a pleasure to see that the whole debate was conducted with good humour and in a civilised way. And I suppose in some ways it's hopeful that the full debate continues in that way, and that we see democracy acting in the way that we would all like it to be enacted. And I think that little debate this afternoon was really promising in that regard. So just a couple of thank yous. I'd really like, on behalf of all of us, on behalf of the CII locally, to thank LV and BIBA as sponsors of this event. And I'd also like to thank John Evans, who puts in a massive amount of effort to make these things happen, and the organising committee. So I think perhaps we give them a round of applause first. Chairman, thank you to you, and thank you to all of the panel members. It was really excellent, good debate, and look forward to continuing it with you over the next year. Thank you.
Thank you.